The rain's already started. Let me tell you a story, no rush, no noise, just a calm place to rest your thoughts. But before we start, make sure you hit that subscribe button. By the way, what time is it where you are right now? The boy who sat at the edge of the field. There was a stretch of land between my apartment and the bus stop, a long, overgrown field with nothing remarkable in it. Just waist-high grasses in the warmer months, patches of snow in winter, and that same crooked fence running along the north side, leaning like it had given up trying to stand properly years ago. I walked that way every afternoon, always around the same time, between work and whatever came next. Usually, nothing. The sidewalk curved near the edge of the field, and for a long while, I never looked into it much. But one day, I noticed him a boy, maybe 13 or 14, sitting at the far edge, facing out across the empty space like he was waiting for something to appear. His posture was always the same, legs crossed, back straight, hands resting on his knees like he was meditating. But his eyes weren't closed. He was watching. Not me, not the cars, not the sky, just something. I couldn't tell what. He didn't fidget, didn't wear headphones or play with a phone, just Saturday. I remember the first time I saw him, I thought maybe he was in trouble. I almost called out, but something in the way he sat stopped me. He didn't seem lost. He seemed placed, like a stone set carefully where it belonged. And so I passed by, thinking I might not see him again, but he was there the next day, and the day after that, and every day after, always at the same time, in the same spot, facing the same part of the field. I never spoke to him, never waved. I just walked by, quietly, half waiting to see if he'd look up. He never did. And slowly, his presence became part of my rhythm, a marker in my day, a small, wordless constant. There was something comforting in it, not in knowing who he was, but in knowing he'd be there. People talk about routine like it's dull, but there's a kind of peace in repetition, especially when the world is so unpredictable. I don't know why I kept looking. Maybe it was the stillness, or maybe, and this thought came later, slowly, like fog lifting, maybe it reminded me of something I'd once felt before I learned to talk over the quiet. I never imagined it would change. But then, one day, he was gone. The day he wasn't there, I noticed too quickly. I told myself not to told myself it didn't matter, that he was probably just sick or late or finally bored of whatever quiet thing he was doing out there. But the truth is, my eyes went to that spot before I even realized I was looking. It had become that automatic, like the way your hand reaches for a railing when climbing stairs, even if you're not thinking about balance. But this time, there was no one sitting cross-legged in the grass. No small, steady figure facing the wind. Just the field still, indifferent, and somehow emptier than it had ever looked before. The difference wasn't loud. It didn't punch the air out of my chest. It just lingered, like a missed note in a familiar song. I kept walking, but slower than usual, my body turned slightly toward the field, as if some part of me still expected to see him tucked somewhere deeper in the grass. But there was nothing, or so I thought. The next day, he was gone again, and the day after that. And slowly, a small ache crept in, not sharp but persistent, the kind that lives behind the ribs when something once quiet disappears. I started standing still for a moment when I passed. Not for long, just enough to make my shadow stretch a little further toward the fence. It wasn't until the fourth day that I saw it. Something small, half hidden near where he always Saturday. I stepped off the path for the first time, just a few paces, the grass brushing against my knees, the sound of it soft and dry beneath my shoes. What I found was simple, a notebook, the kind with a brown paper cover and a bent spine, left open to a page somewhere near the middle. No name, no explanation. Just a rough pencil sketch of the field itself, drawn from above like a map, or maybe a memory. In the center of the drawing was a small figure, sitting cross-legged just like he always did. But what struck me most wasn't the boy in the picture. It was what surrounded him, tiny marks, shapes in the grass, like something was moving toward him from all sides. It wasn't ominous. It wasn't clear. It just looked intentional. I stood there for a long while, the notebook in my hands, unsure whether I was intruding or invited. And for the first time since he'd vanished, I wondered if maybe I hadn't been watching him as closely as I thought. Maybe it had been the other way around. I didn't know what to do with the notebook, not at first. I took it home without deciding to, slipping it gently into the side pocket of my bag, as if I might give it back, though I had no one to give it to. That evening, I set it on the small table near the window and left it there untouched while I moved through the soft edges of my usual routine. I made tea, turned on the lamp with the warm light, let music play in the background, slow, instrumental, something without words to crowd the air. But my eyes kept drifting toward the notebook. It didn't feel forgotten. It felt placed, even here. Eventually, I sat down beside it and opened it again, more carefully this time, like I was listening with my hands. Most of the pages were sketches, loose, intuitive pencil drawings, not polished, but deeply observant, noticing things most people would miss. A bent blade of grass, the posture of a crow standing in silence, the cracked top rail of the fence that lined the field. And in almost every sketch, somewhere, sometimes obvious, sometimes tucked in like a secret, there was the boy. Always sitting, always facing something. And as I turned the pages, a soft realization began to form. Like fog gathering rather than falling, he had never been still. I had assumed he was waiting for something to come to him, but in the sketches, his attention was always cast outward, not searching, not passive, but watching. There was one page that made me stop longer than the rest. It was a sketch of the sidewalk, my sidewalk, the path I took each day, and in the corner, barely more than a suggestion, was a figure walking alone, shoulders a little hunched, head angled down. It was me. I knew it before I wanted to admit it. And what startled me wasn't the recognition, it was the tenderness of it. He hadn't drawn me as a stranger. He'd drawn me as someone seen. I set the notebook down and just sat there for a while, the room soft with quiet, the lamp humming faintly beside me. And for the first time in a long while, I felt something gentle loosen in my chest. Not a question, not an answer, just a breath. Maybe this wasn't a story about someone I'd lost. Maybe it was about someone who had noticed me before I even thought to look back. I started taking a different route, not out of efficiency or even habit, but because I felt something pulling me toward the field, not to look for the boy, not really, but to be near the space where he had once been, I began cutting across the grass instead of walking the curved sidewalk. My shoes brushed through the tall stems, now dry and pale with the season, and the sound they made was soft and whispering, like a language only the wind could understand. I never expected to see him again. That part, somehow, had settled in me the acceptance that his presence had passed through my life like a small, significant weather pattern, shifting something in the air and then moving on. But I still found myself walking slower, near the spot where he used to sit. I'd pause sometimes without meaning to, as if something might rise up from the earth if I stood quietly enough. And the more I did this, the more I allowed myself to move without rushing, to look at the broken fence without trying to fix it, to feel the field with my whole self, the more I realized he'd taught me something. Not directly, not in conversation, but in posture, in presence. The boy had never been waiting. He had been witnessing. And I had passed him over and over, thinking I was the one noticing him, when maybe what I'd really been feeling was the warmth of someone who had already noticed me. That kind of attention, the kind that asks for nothing, that sits with you without questions, is rare. And now, as I moved through the space he'd once held, I began to notice things I hadn't before. The way the grass grew slightly flatter near the middle, as if it still remembered his shape. The way the birds circled differently overhead, never directly above the spot, always in a wider ring. Even the wind felt quieter there, like it respected something. I didn't bring the notebook with me. I left it on the table at home, open to the sketch of the sidewalk with my figure in the corner. It felt like enough to carry the memory of it, enough to carry the feeling. And each time I walked through the field, I felt less like I was searching and more like I was returning not to him, but to something in myself that had gone quiet. Something that now, slowly, was beginning to speak again. It was late afternoon, one of those early autumn days when the sun starts slanting differently, warmer in color but cooler on the skin. I had walked my usual way through the field, not expecting anything, not even the familiar hush I'd grown used to. But as I neared the far edge, I noticed someone standing where the grass met the fence, not sitting, not still like he had been, but standing with one hand resting gently on the wood like she'd known it for a long time. An older woman, maybe late 60s, wearing a blue coat too warm for the weather and a patterned scarf tied simply around her neck. Her posture wasn't tense. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking out across the field, toward nothing in particular, or perhaps everything. I slowed without meaning to, not out of suspicion or awkwardness, but because something about her presence reminded me of the boys. She held the space the same way gently, without asking anything from it. As I passed, I nodded slightly, and she returned it with a kind of smile that feels older than it looks. "You knew him too, didn't you?" she asked, so quietly I almost thought I imagined it. I stopped, surprised by how easily the words reached me. "I saw him," I said, unsure if that counted. Walked past him most days, never spoke. She nodded, eyes still on the grass. "He didn't need words," she said. "Some people are just here to notice." That was his gift. I didn't ask how she knew him, whether they were related, or if she simply passed by like I had. It didn't feel necessary. There was something about the way she said gift that closed the door on small talk and opened one somewhere deeper. We stood there in silence for a moment, the breeze threading between us like it belonged. Then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. A small stone, smooth and dark, with a shape that curved into your palm, like it had always been meant to fit there. She handed it to me without explanation. "He left things behind," she said, "not on purpose, just by being the way he was." I took the stone carefully. It was warm from her hand, heavier than it looked. She turned back to the fence, not dismissing me, just returning to her own rhythm. I stood for a moment longer, unsure what to say, so I said nothing, just held the stone and let the stillness settle around us. As I walked away, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Some people leave you with something you can carry, even when you never knew their name. The stone didn't speak, of course. It didn't unlock anything or whisper meaning in the middle of the night. It simply became part of my days, the way certain small objects do when they arrive at the right time. I kept it on the windowsill at first, beside the plant that never quite grew but never died either. Sometimes I'd pick it up in the morning as I sipped my first cup of coffee, not out of ritual, just instinct, the same way you might trace the rim of a mug without thinking. The surface was impossibly smooth, like it had been carried through water for years. But there were marks, two faint striations along one side, like fingerprints etched into time. I didn't try to decode them. It felt enough to hold it, to remember where it came from and how gently it had been given. And slowly, without announcement, the stone began to gather a kind of meaning, not as a symbol of the boy, but as a quiet thread, tying together the parts of myself I'd often let fall silent. I thought more about what it means to be present without needing to explain yourself. How often we walk through the world trying to prove something, when sometimes the most generous thing we can do is simply witness. That's what the boy had done. Without speaking, without asking, he had noticed. And now I found myself doing the same, sitting by my own window longer in the evenings, watching the way light softened across the rooftops, noticing neighbors I used to pass without thought. I began writing again, nothing ambitious, just quiet lines in a notebook that felt more like listening than saying. And in those words I found pieces of myself I hadn't visited in years. There was no grand transformation, no sudden realization, just a soft opening, a breath I hadn't taken in a long time. The boy was still gone, and I never saw the woman again. But they'd both left something, not stories, not memories, just the shape of a feeling I could carry in my palm, and the quiet permission to let it matter. It was a few weeks after I'd found the notebook, maybe more time had grown soft around the edges, the way it does when your days begin to slow down in small, unremarkable ways. I hadn't gone looking for anything, not that day. I'd only gone for a walk. But when I came to the field, something in my steps shifted. I turned off the path without thinking, letting the grass fold quietly around my ankles, and I made my way to the far edge, the place where he used to sit. The air was still. The fence creaked softly in the breeze, and in the distance, traffic hummed like a memory just out of reach. I stood for a moment, unsure, but the space welcomed me without question. So I Saturday, right there, legs crossed in the way I remembered, hands resting lightly on my knees. The earth was cool beneath me, not uncomfortable, just honest. And for the first time, I looked out across the field not as someone passing by, but as someone staying. The view was ordinary, just wind-touched grass, scattered leaves, a sky beginning to pale toward evening. But something in it felt large, not dramatic, not magical, just full, like everything had more room to breathe out here. I thought of the boy, how he'd sat here all those days, unmoving, watching without being watched. Maybe he hadn't needed an answer either. Maybe this was his way of being part of the world without having to name his place in it. I didn't stay long. 15 minutes, maybe 20. Long enough for my breathing to match the rhythm of the breeze, long enough for the thoughts to quiet into something softer than thought. And when I stood, brushing the grass from my jeans, I didn't feel changed exactly, just steadier, like something inside me had lined up again. I left no mark behind, took nothing with me, but for the rest of the day and into the night, I carried that stillness like a sound you can't hear but somehow remember. And I realized then we don't always sit down to find something. Sometimes we sit down to say, I'm here. I see this. I'm part of it too. I still walk past the field most days. I don't sit there often, not anymore. But I do slow down when I reach the place where the grass dips ever so slightly, where the wind always seems to move a little differently, like it remembers something I can't quite name. The boy never came back. I stopped expecting him long ago, and yet his presence never really left. It's strange how someone you never spoke to, never even exchanged a glance with, can stay with you in ways people you've known for years sometimes don't. He gave me nothing directly, and maybe that's why it meant so much. He didn't offer advice or comfort or explanation. He offered being, quiet, steady, honest presence. And now, when I feel the world pulling too hard, when the noise gets louder than I'd like, I find myself remembering the stillness of that edge of the field place. I picture him sitting there, small and unmoving, holding the world in his silence. I remember the stone, still tucked gently in the drawer beside my bed. I remember the notebook, and the way my shape appeared in one of its pages, not important, not highlighted, just seen. I think we all want that deep down, to be seen in a quiet, unspoken way, not for what we do or say or prove, but simply for being here. And maybe that's what this has become for me, a reminder that presence matters, that you can carry people with you without ever knowing their full story, that noticing is a kind of love too. And sometimes the most meaningful moments are the ones that leave no trace but the shift they cause inside you. I still don't know who he was. I still don't know why he sat there, but I don't need to. Some stories don't ask to be solved. They ask to be held gently, like light through tall grass. And when you do, when you let them live without pressing too hard, they offer something in return. Not a conclusion, not a resolution, just this, the soft, enduring truth that even the smallest presence can change the shape of your days. And maybe, in some quiet way, that's what we're here for.